I'm Maria, 32, female, and my sister abandoned her children at my house for 6 months. So I became their legal guardian, only for her to return and try to steal my money when her new life fell apart. It sounds like the plot of a dramatic movie, but it became my reality one drizzly Friday afternoon, and my quiet, predictable life has never been the same since. My life up until that point was a testament to calm predictability. I'm a librarian, a profession that suited my love for order, quiet, and the gentle turning of pages. My partner, Mark, is an accountant. Together, we had built a life that was as stable and reassuring as a balanced ledger. We lived in a modest two-bedroom house in a quiet suburb, filled with books, comfortable furniture, and the gentle hum of a life lived without major incident. We weren't parents yet, but we had talked about it, planning for a future that was 2 or 3 years down the road, after a few more trips and a little more in our savings account. Our biggest debate was whether to get a cat or a dog. My sister, Chloe, was the opposite of my calm. At 29, she was a whirlwind of beautiful, charming chaos. Where I planned, she improvised. Where I saved, she spent. Where I sought stability, she chased excitement. Our parents used to joke that they had raised 2 children from different planets. I loved her, of course. She was my only sister, the other half of my childhood memories. But loving Chloe often came with a side of anxiety. Her life was a series of intense but short-lived passions. Jobs she loved for a month, apartments she adored for 6, and boyfriends who were the love of her life until they were. Her 2 children, 8-year-old Leo and 5-year-old Mia, were the anchors that were supposed to ground her. And in many ways, they did. She loved them fiercely, I never doubted that. But her love was like her personality, passionate and overwhelming one moment and distracted the next. She was a fun mom, the type to organize spontaneous water balloon fights and declare ice cream for dinner. But she wasn't always a responsible one. My role as the auntie in charge had been unofficial but well-established for years. I remember one specific incident about 3 years ago. Chloe had just started dating a musician and was completely swept up in his world. She called me on a Wednesday, breathless with excitement. "Mimi," she'd said, using my childhood nickname, "you will not believe it. Greg's band got a last-minute gig opening for someone huge in the city. It's a 2-night thing. Can you please watch the kids? I'll be back Sunday morning, I promise." I had a major cataloging project at the library that weekend, but the desperation in her voice was palpable, so I agreed. Sunday morning came and went, then Sunday evening. I called her phone repeatedly, each call going straight to a crackly, full voicemail box. I was frantic. Mark had to talk me down from calling the police. She finally waltzed in on Monday afternoon, full of apologies and carrying cheap souvenirs for the kids. The gig had been extended, her phone had died, she'd lost the charger. The excuses tumbled out, all delivered with a charming, self-deprecating smile that made it hard to stay angry. But I saw the look on little Leo's face. He was only 5 then, but his disappointment was a tangible thing. He just hugged her leg and didn't let go for an hour. Another time, about a year before everything fell apart, she lost her job at a boutique. She didn't tell anyone for 3 weeks. Instead, she kept up appearances, dropping the kids at daycare and spending her days at work, which I later found out meant sitting in coffee shops and applying for jobs she was either over or underqualified for. The truth only came out when the daycare called me, their emergency contact, because Chloe's payment card had been declined for the 3rd time and she wasn't answering her phone. I had to leave work, rush over to pay the bill in cash, and then sit with her that night as she cried, admitting she was too ashamed to tell anyone. I paid her rent that month. Mark and I agreed to it because what else could we do? The kids needed a roof over their heads. So when Chloe called me that fateful Friday, her voice buzzing with a familiar, frantic energy, I should have been more suspicious. "Maria, you are a lifesaver, seriously, the best sister in the entire world," she began, the flattery already setting off a tiny alarm bell in my head. "I have a surprise opportunity, a little weekend getaway. A friend is taking me and it's all paid for, but it's this weekend. Like right now, can I drop Leo and Mia off in an hour? I'll pick them up Sunday night. 7 o'clock sharp, I promise." A weekend getaway? Chloe, it's the middle of the school term, I said, my librarian brain already cataloging the logistical issues. Leo has that big solar system project due on Tuesday. Oh, he's finished it mostly. We can finish. The last planet when I get back, she said breezily. It'll be fine. Please, Maria. I really, really need this. I've been so stressed. The mention of her stress was the hook, and she knew it. I pictured her, a single mom juggling 2 jobs and 2 kids. How could I say no to a weekend of rest for her? Mark was home with me, and he just gave me a small, resigned nod. He knew the drill. Okay, Chloe, fine, I sighed. But Sunday at 7, don't be late, the kids have school on Monday. You're the best, I love you, see you in an hour, she chirped, and the line went dead. An hour later, her beat-up car pulled into our driveway. She practically pushed the kids out of the car, each holding a single, hastily packed backpack. Leo looked subdued, his eyes fixed on the ground. Mia, ever the bubbly one, ran to hug me, but even her smile seemed a little watery. Chloe gave me a quick, distracted hug. She was wearing new jeans and a top I'd never seen before, and she smelled of a new, expensive-smelling perfume. She avoided my eyes. Okay, my little angels, be good for Auntie Maria and Uncle Mark, she said, kissing them both on the top of their heads. Mommy will be back before you know it. She turned to me, her car keys already jangling in her hand. His name is Kevin, she whispered, a conspiratorial glint in her eye. He's amazing. A bit younger, but so mature for his age. He's a personal trainer. I'll tell you all about it when I get back. And with that, she was gone. She reversed out of the driveway so fast her tires squealed on the pavement. I stood there on the porch, Mia's small hand in mine and Leo standing silently beside me, and watched her car disappear around the corner. I had no idea that before you know it would mean 6 months, 2 lawyers, and 1,000 tears. I just thought it was another one of Chloe's weekends. The first 24 hours felt normal, a familiar routine we had slipped into many times before. Mark grilled burgers for dinner, and we let the kids watch a movie, a treat that brought a genuine smile to Mia's face and even coaxed a small one out of Leo. We set them up in the guest room, which had 2 twin beds. Mia was asleep the second her head hit the pillow, clutching the stuffed bunny she never went anywhere without. Leo, however, stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. "Are you okay, buddy?" I asked, sitting on the edge of his bed. He shrugged, his small shoulders barely moving under the comforter. "Mom seemed really happy," he said quietly. "She did," I agreed. "She said she needed a little break, you know how hard she works." "Is she with a new friend?" he asked, his voice laced with a child's careful curiosity. He was old enough to remember the parade of friends that had come and gone. "Yes, his name is Kevin," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "She said she'd tell us all about him when she gets back." He just nodded and turned onto his side, facing the wall. A few minutes later, his breathing evened out. The conversation left me with a small, cold knot in my stomach. He was too young to be so worried about his mom's happiness. Saturday was a blur of parks and pizza. We did our best to keep them distracted and happy. I tried calling Chloe once in the afternoon just to check in. It rang and rang before clicking to her voicemail, which was, as usual, full. I texted her, "Hey, kids are great. Hope you're having a good time. Call me when you get a chance." The message showed as delivered, but there was no reply. I told myself she was just busy, having fun being present in her surprise getaway. Mark reminded me that the whole point was for her to unplug. By Sunday afternoon, the anxiety started to creep in more insistently. The 7 p.m. deadline loomed. We had the kids bathed and in their pajamas by 6:30, their backpacks packed and waiting by the door. We tidied up, made sure the house was ready for the handover. 7 o'clock came and went. Then 7:30. At 7:45, I called her phone again, straight to voicemail. I texted again, "Hey, it's almost 8. Are you on your way? Kids are getting tired." No response. "She's probably just stuck in traffic," Mark said, though he was starting to pace between the living room and the kitchen. Leo was trying to be brave, pretending to be engrossed in a book, but I saw him glance at the front door every time a car drove down our street. Mia was starting to get fussy. "I want my mommy," she whimpered, her lower lip trembling. I scooped her onto my lap, her little body warm and heavy against mine. "She'll be here soon, sweetie," I murmured, stroking her hair. I felt like a liar. By 9 p.m., the knot in my stomach had grown into a solid block of ice. This wasn't like her usual lateness. This was different. The silence was heavier. I tried her social media, a place she usually documented every minor event of her life. Nothing. Her last post was from 4 days ago, a picture of a sunset with a generic, hopeful caption. "Okay, something's row." "NG," I said to Mark, my voice shaking slightly. "This isn't just Chloe being Chloe." "What do we do?" he asked, his own face a mask of concern. We put the children to bed. Mia cried herself to sleep, murmuring for her mommy. Leo didn't cry. He just laid in bed, rigid and silent, his back to the door. His silence was somehow more heartbreaking than his sister's tears. Once they were asleep, Mark and I sat at the kitchen table, Chloe's number on my phone screen. I tried calling every half hour. Every single time, it went straight to voicemail. I sent a barrage of texts, each more frantic than the last. "Chloe, where are you? Please call me. I'm starting to get really scared. Just text me that you're okay, please. Chloe, if I don't hear from you by morning, I'm calling the police." The night was agonizingly long. Neither of us slept much. Every creak of the house, every passing headlight sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. At around 3 a.m., I tried her number one more time. This time, I didn't even get her voicemail. I got a crisp, automated recording. "The number you have dialed has been disconnected." I dropped the phone on the table as if it had burned me. "Mark," I whispered, my blood running cold. "Her phone is disconnected." He stared at me, the last shred of his "she's just being irresponsible" theory vanishing from his eyes. We were no longer waiting for a late sister. We were sitting in the middle of a mystery. She had vanished. She had taken off with a man we'd never met, leaving her children with us, and then she had cut off her only line of communication. The next morning, I had to call the elementary school and tell them Leo wouldn't be in. "Family emergency," I said, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. I tried calling our parents, who had retired to Florida. They were worried, but their immediate assumption was that this was just another chapter in the book of Chloe's unreliability. "Oh, Maria, you know how she is," my mom said with a sigh. "She'll turn up in a day or two with some wild story. Don't you worry. Thank you for taking care of the kids." But I did worry. This felt different. Deeper. The disconnected phone was a deliberate act. It wasn't a dead battery or a lost charger. It was a conscious choice to sever ties. The weekend getaway was a lie. This was an escape. The first week was a blur of forced smiles for the children and frantic, hushed conversations with Mark at night. We filed a missing persons report, but the police were lukewarm. A 29-year-old woman with a history of impulsive behavior who willingly left her kids with family. They took the report, but it was clear she wasn't a high priority. They treated it as a voluntary disappearance. We had to buy clothes for the kids, toothbrushes, school supplies. Every purchase felt unnervingly permanent. Every night Mia would ask, "Is Mommy coming home tomorrow?" And every night I would have to look into her big, hopeful eyes and say, "I don't know, sweetheart, but we're going to take good care of you until she does." The days bled into a week, then two. The terrible truth began to settle in our bones. Chloe wasn't just late. She wasn't just lost. She was gone. She had packed a bag, whispered the name of a new boyfriend, and walked away from her life, leaving her two most precious pieces behind on my doorstep. She had abandoned them. The first month was about survival. Our quiet, orderly house became a chaotic, noisy, and wonderfully messy home. The silence was replaced by the sound of cartoons, the pitter-patter of small feet running down the hallway, and arguments over which toy belonged to whom. My collection of classic literature on the coffee table was replaced with Lego creations and half-finished coloring books. Mark's pristine home office now had a designated corner for Mia's art studio, which consisted of a small plastic table and a mountain of construction paper, glitter, and dried macaroni. Adapting our lives was like trying to solve a complex puzzle with missing pieces. Our work schedules, our budget, our social life, everything had to be reconfigured. Mark started working from home 2 days a week to help with school drop-offs. My evenings, once reserved for quiet reading or dinner with friends, were now a whirlwind of homework help, bath time negotiations, and bedtime stories. We learned that Leo hated the crusts on his sandwiches, and that Mia would only wear dresses, never pants. We learned that Leo was a math whiz but struggled with reading, and that Mia could spend hours drawing elaborate pictures of our new family, which always included her, Leo, Mark, me, and a small, smiling figure off to the side that she would label Mommy. The financial strain was immediate and significant. Children are expensive. There were doctor's appointments for checkups, new shoes because their feet never stopped growing, and endless grocery bills. Mark, being an accountant, sat down one night with a spreadsheet. His face grim. "We can manage this," he said, tapping his pen on the table. "But it will be tight. We'll have to pull back on our savings, and that trip to Italy is definitely on hold." He looked up at me, his eyes full of a weary kindness that made my heart ache. "Are you sure you're okay with this, Maria?" I looked past him, through the doorway into the living room where Leo and Mia were huddled together on the couch, sharing a blanket while watching a movie. Leo had his arm around his little sister, a protective gesture that was becoming more common. In that moment, the trip to Italy felt like a frivolous dream from another lifetime. "I'm sure," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "They're not just Chloe's kids anymore, Mark. They're our kids for now." The emotional toll was far heavier than the financial one. Mia's confusion often manifested as clinginess and nightmares. She would wake up screaming in the middle of the night, convinced a monster was in her room. I would rush in to find her trembling, her face streaked with tears. I would hold her, rock her, and hum lullabies until her small body relaxed against mine. The monster, I knew, was the gaping hole her mother had left behind. Leo's pain was quieter, sharper. He was old enough to understand abandonment, and his grief had hardened into a shell of anger and resentment. He rarely spoke about his mom. If I brought her up gently, he would shut down, his expression becoming closed and guarded. He started having trouble at school, getting into small scuffles on the playground. His teacher, a kind woman named Mrs. Davis, called me for a conference. "He's a sweet boy, Maria," she said, her office filled with children's art. "But he's carrying a lot of anger. He told another boy that his mom was on a secret mission, and that's why she wasn't here. He's trying to protect himself." I left that meeting with tears in my eyes. Chloe hadn't just left behind 2 children, she had left behind 2 gaping wounds that Mark and I were desperately trying to heal. We found a child therapist, a wonderful woman who started seeing both Leo and Mia weekly. It was another expense, another appointment to juggle, but it was non-negotiable. They needed a safe space to process feelings that we weren't equipped to handle on our own. Slowly, painstakingly, we started to build our new normal. We established routines. Taco Tuesdays became a sacred tradition. Friday was movie night, complete with popcorn and blanket forts in the living room. Sunday mornings were for making pancakes together, with Mia in charge of adding the chocolate chips and Leo as the official syrup pourer. These small rituals became the scaffolding of our new family structure, providing a sense of stability and predictability that the children desperately needed. There were moments of pure, unadulterated joy that caught me by surprise. The first time Mia called me Mama Maria by accident and then blushed, hiding her face in my shoulder. The afternoon Leo came home from school with a drawing of the solar system, the project he was supposed to have finished with his mom, and explained every planet to me with meticulous detail, his face glowing with pride. The evening Mark, a man who I thought only found joy in spreadsheets, found himself on his hands and knees on the floor, making roaring dinosaur noises as the kids shrieked with laughter and climbed all over him. In these moments, I felt a fierce, protective love for them that was terrifying in its intensity. It was a love born of crisis, forged in the fires of abandonment and worry. They were burrowing their way into the deepest parts of my heart, and the thought of Chloe waltzing back in and ripping them away became a constant, low-grade fear humming beneath the surface of my daily life. 2 months in, my parents flew up from Florida. They were shocked by the reality of the situation, the initial belief that Chloe will be Chloe finally crumbling in the face of our new life. My mother cried when she saw how much Mia had grown. My father, a quiet man, spent an entire afternoon in the backyard teaching Leo how to throw a baseball. "I don't understand how she could do this," my mother said to me one evening, her voice breaking as she watched Mia sleep. Her own children. "I don't understand either, Mom," I confessed. "But we can't dwell on that, we just have to focus on them." Leaving them at the end of the week, my mother hugged me tightly at the airport. "You are a good woman, Maria," she whispered in my ear. "A better woman than I was. I think I made too many excuses for her over the years." Her confession hung in the air between us, an acknowledgement of a long history of enabling that had perhaps, in some small way, led us to this point. As the 3rd-month mark approached, we were no longer just surviving. We were building a life. A messy, complicated, beautiful, and unexpected life. The question of if Chloe would return had slowly been placed by the much more complicated question of what happens when she does. The breaking point came on a Tuesday in the middle of the 4th month. I received a call from the school nurse. Mia had stumbled on the playground and hit her head. She was fine, just a nasty bump and a goose egg that was already turning a spectacular shade of purple, but the school's policy required a parent or legal guardian to sign a consent form before they could administer anything more than an ice pack. "I'm on my way," I said, my heart pounding, but the nurse stopped me. "I'm sorry, Ms. Garcia," she said, her tone sympathetic but firm. "I know you're her aunt and you're her emergency contact, but for any medical treatment or formal decisions, we need consent from a legal guardian. Is her mother available?" The question hung in the air, heavy and absurd. Is her mother available? I wanted to scream. No, her mother is on a 6-month joyride with a man-child and has vanished from the face of the earth. Instead, I took a deep breath. "No, she is not. I am her sole caregiver." "I understand," the nurse said gently. "But legally, my hands are tied. You'll need to take her to an urgent care clinic yourself." I left work, my boss giving me a worried but understanding look, and rushed to the school. Seeing Mia's tear-streaked face and the giant lump on her forehead sent a wave of pure rage through me. Not at the nurse, not at the school, but at Chloe. Her selfishness had consequences that rippled out in 1,000 different directions, and this was one of them. I couldn't even authorize basic medical care for the child I was tucking into bed every night. That night, after the kids were asleep, I told Mark what had happened. He listened silently, his jaw tight. When I was done, he didn't say anything for a long time. He just got up, went to his office, and came back with a legal pad and a pen. "We can't do this anymore," he said, his voice low and serious. "We're living in legal limbo, Maria. What happens if there's a real emergency? What about school enrollment for next year? We need to be able to make decisions for them. We need to protect them." "What are you saying?" I asked, though I already knew. "I'm saying we need to pursue legal guardianship," he stated, writing the words at the top of the page. "Temporary guardianship, at least. It's the only way to give them the stability and protection they deserve." The words hung in the air between us. Legal guardianship. It felt so cold, so official, so final. It felt like a betrayal of my sister, even though she had betrayed us all so profoundly. It was one thing to care for her kids, it was another to go to a court and legally declare her unfit. "Can we even do that?" I whispered. "I don't know," Mark admitted, "but we have to find out." The next day, Mark made an appointment with a family law attorney, a woman named Ms. Evans, whose online reviews described her as compassionate but tough. Walking into her office felt surreal. It was all polished wood and thick carpets, a world away from our chaotic, glitter-covered living room. Ms. Evans listened to our story patiently, her expression unreadable. She asked pointed questions. When was the last time I'd heard from Chloe? Did I have proof of the disconnected phone number? Did I have records of the expenses we'd incurred? Had Chloe ever exhibited this kind of behavior before? I answered everything, my voice steady, laying out the last 4 months of our lives like evidence in a case. When I finished, she leaned back in her leather chair. "You have a very strong case for temporary guardianship based on abandonment," she said, her voice calm and reassuring. "Chloe has willfully abdicated her parental responsibilities. The court's primary concern will always be the best interest of the children, and right now, their best interest is clearly with you. You provide a stable, loving, and safe environment." The process, she explained, would be draining. We would have to formally serve notice to Chloe's last known address, which we knew was pointless. An investigator would likely be assigned to verify our story and inspect our home. We would have to appear in court. It would be emotionally taxing and expensive. "Are you prepared for that?" she asked, looking at us both intently. I looked at Mark, who reached over and took my hand, his grip firm and steady. I thought of Mia's nightmares and Leo's quiet anger. I thought of the nurse on the phone, her hands tied by a legal technicality while a little girl needed care. "Yes," I said, my voice clear and strong. "We are." The next 6 weeks were a deluge of paperwork, phone calls, and anxiety. We gathered bank statements to show the financial support, got letters from the school and the therapist, and prepared for a home study from a social worker. The social worker, a kind but thorough woman, walked through our house, checked our fridge, and interviewed Mark and me separately. He then spoke to the children alone. I sat in the kitchen, my hands trembling, trying not to eavesdrop as she asked Leo and Mia gentle questions in the living room. The court date was set for a gray, overcast morning at the end of the 5th month. We arranged for a friend to watch the kids. Sitting in that sterile courtroom felt like being in a different reality. Ms. Evans presented our case calmly and methodically. She presented the evidence of abandonment, the disconnected phone, the lack of any contact for nearly half a year. She presented our financial records, the therapist's reports, the letter from the school. The judge, a stern-looking woman with kind eyes, reviewed the file in silence. She looked up at us. "It's clear to this court," she said, her voice echoing slightly in the quiet room, "that the children's mother has abandoned them and that their current placement with their maternal aunt and her partner is stable and in their best interest. The motion for temporary legal guardianship is granted." A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. I felt Mark's hand squeeze mine. It was done. We had the legal right to protect them, to make decisions for them, to be their parents in every way that mattered. Walking out of the courthouse, the gray sky seemed a little brighter. It wasn't a celebration, not really. It was a somber victory. We hadn't won anything. We had simply formalized the reality we had been living for months. That night, holding the official court document in my hands, I felt the immense weight of it all. It was a piece of paper, but it represented so much more. It was a shield. It was a promise. It was the legal armor we now wore to protect 2 children who had been left defenseless. We were their guardians, not just in our hearts, but in the eyes of the law. And as it turned out, we would need that armor much sooner than we thought. Life under the shield of legal guardianship was different. A subtle shift occurred, a quiet exhale we didn't even know we had been holding. We enrolled Leo in the better-funded school district in our town for the upcoming year. We signed Mia up for a children's gymnastics class she'd been begging to join. We could sign permission slips, authorize medical care, and make plans for the future without the constant, nagging fear of our lack of legal standing. The children, in their own resilient ways, were thriving. Mia's nightmares became less frequent. She was a social butterfly in her gymnastics class, a tiny tornado of ribbons and cartwheels. Leo's anger began to soften, its sharp edges worn down by the steady rhythm of our life and the patient work of his therapist. He made a new best friend, a boy named Sam, and his laughter, once a rare and precious sound, became a more regular fixture in our home. They still talked about their mom, but it was with a growing sense of distance, as if talking about a character in a story they once knew. We had just passed the 6-month mark since Chloe's disappearance. It was a Saturday afternoon in late spring. Mark was in the backyard with Leo, attempting to assemble a new, ridiculously complicated barbecue grill. I was in the kitchen with Mia, who was diligently, helping me make cookies by mostly eating the chocolate chips. The sun was streaming through the window, the smell of freshly cut grass drifted in, and for the first time in a long time, the moment felt completely, blessedly normal. Then the doorbell rang. I wiped my hands on a towel, expecting it to be a delivery or perhaps Sam's mom dropping something off. Mia followed me, her face dusted with flour. I opened the door, a casual smile on my face, and my world tilted on its axis. It was Chloe. But it was a version of Chloe I had never seen before. The vibrant, chaotic energy that always surrounded her was gone, replaced by a dull, brittle exhaustion. Her usually stylish hair was lank and unwashed, pulled back in a messy bun. She was wearing stained sweatpants and a frayed hoodie, clothes that looked like they'd been slept in for a week. Her face was pale and thin, with dark circles under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and deep unhappiness. She was holding a single, battered duffel bag. She stared at me, her eyes wide and desperate. "Maria," she breathed, her voice a raw croak. I was frozen, my hand still on the doorknob. My brain couldn't process the image in front of me. This wasn't the triumphant return I had sometimes dreaded, the one where she'd show up tanned and happy, ready to reclaim her life. This was a woman who had been broken. Mia peeked out from behind my legs. "Mommy," she whispered, her voice a mixture of shock and awe. Chloe's eyes dropped to her daughter, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than desperation crossed her face. It was a pained, yearning love. "Hi, baby," she choked out. The sound of her voice broke the spell. Leo and Mark, hearing the commotion, came in from backyard. Leo stopped dead in the doorway, his eyes locking on his mother. His face, which had been so open and happy moments before, became a hard, unreadable mask. "Chloe," Mark said, his voice low and cautious. He moved to stand beside me, a protective presence. I came back," Chloe stammered, as if that explained everything. "It didn't work out. Kevin, he was a mistake, a huge mistake. Everything fell apart." Her words tumbled out in a frantic rush. "I lost the apartment. My car broke down. I have nothing. I came back for my kids." She took a step forward, her arms reaching for Mia. "Come here, sweetie. Come to mommy." But Mia didn't run to her. She instinctively shrank back, pressing herself harder against my leg. Her tiny hand clutched my pants. That small gesture, that moment of hesitation, was more damning than any accusation. Chloe's face fell. She looked at Leo, who hadn't moved a muscle. "Leo, honey, it's me." Leo just stared at her, his expression a mixture of anger and betrayal. He said nothing. "I want them back," Chloe said, her voice gaining a sharp, demanding edge. The desperation was quickly curdling into entitlement. "They're my children. I'm their mother. You can't keep them from me." "Chloe, stop," I said, finally finding my voice. It was shaking, but it was firm. "You can't just show up like this and expect to pick up where you left off. It's been 6 months. "I know how long it's been," she snapped, her eyes flashing with a familiar fire. "I made a mistake, okay? A terrible one. People make mistakes. But they are my kids. You need to pack their things. We're leaving." The sheer audacity of her demand was breathtaking. She hadn't asked how they were. She hadn't apologized for the terror and uncertainty she had put them, and us, through. She had simply appeared on our doorstep, broken and defeated, and demanded that we hand over the children like they were a package she had left for safekeeping. "No," I said. The word was quiet but unyielding. "They're not going anywhere." "What did you say?" she asked, her voice dangerously low. "They are not leaving this house," Mark added, his tone leaving no room for argument. "Chloe, they have a life here. They have school, friends, a routine. You can't just rip them out of it." "A life? You gave them a life?" She spat, her voice dripping with venom. "You stole them. You were just waiting for me to mess up so you could have the family you never had. You always wanted to be me, Maria. You were always jealous." The accusation was so ludicrous, so far from the truth that it almost made me laugh. Jealous? I was jealous of the sleepless nights, the frantic worry, the crushing responsibility. "That's enough," I said, my voice rising. "This isn't about me or you. This is about Leo and Mia. You abandoned them, Chloe. You disappeared without a word and left them to wonder if their mother was even alive. Do you have any idea what that does to a child?" "I'm here now," she wailed, tears finally starting to stream down her pale cheeks. It wasn't the cry of remorse, it was the cry of frustration. The cry of someone who wasn't getting what they wanted. "I'm their mother, and I'm taking them home." "Home?" I asked, my voice incredulous. "Where is home, Chloe? You just said you lost your apartment, you have nothing. Are you going to take them to a shelter? To live in a car?" Her face crumpled. She had no answer. The raw, ugly truth of her situation was laid bare on my welcome mat. She had come back not because she was ready to be a mother, but because she had nowhere else to go. The children were her lifeline, her last resort. "You need to leave," I said, my heart pounding in my chest. "We can talk later when you're calm, but right now you are upsetting the children and you need to leave." "I'm not going anywhere without my kids," she shrieked, her voice cracking with hysteria. It was then that I did the hardest thing I'd ever had to do. I looked at Leo and Mia, who were watching this horrifying scene with wide, terrified eyes. "Mark," I said, my voice trembling, "take the kids to the backyard. Now." Mark nodded, his face grim. He gently steered a frozen Leo and a whimpering Mia towards the back door. Leo looked back at me one last time, his eyes full of a terrible, adult-like pain. Then they were gone, and it was just me and the ghost of my sister on the porch. The battle for their future had just begun. With the children out of earshot, the thin veneer of civility shattered completely. The confrontation on the porch became raw and ugly. "How dare you?" Chloe hissed, her face contorted with rage. "You turn my own children against me. You kick me out when I have nowhere else to go. Some sister you are." "A sister?" I shot back, my own voice tight with 6 months of pent-up anger and fear. "A sister doesn't abandon her family. A sister doesn't disconnect her phone and let everyone think she might be dead. I spent nights, nights, staring at the ceiling, wondering if you were lying in a ditch somewhere, while I was trying to comfort your sobbing daughter. I needed a break. You have no idea what my life was like," she cried. "And you have no idea what our life has been like since you left," I countered. "Do you know what we did last month, Chloe? We went to court. We stood in front of a judge and were granted legal guardianship of your children, because in the eyes of the law and in reality, you abandoned them." The words legal guardianship hit her like a physical blow. She staggered back a step, her face draining of all color. "You what?" she whispered, horrified. "You went behind my back. You legally stole my children." "We legally protected them," I corrected her, my voice steely. "We did what we had to do to enroll them in school, to get them medical care, to give them the security you ripped away from them. This is their home now. You don't get to just walk back in and destroy that because your fantasy life with your 22-year-old boyfriend fell apart." Her face crumpled, the fight draining out of her. She sank onto the porch steps and buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with sobs. This time they sounded real. They were the sobs of absolute defeat. For a fleeting moment, I felt a pang of pity for the broken woman in front of me. This was still my sister. But then I thought of Leo's stoic, wounded face and Mia's tiny hand clinging to my leg, and the pity was replaced by a cold, hard resolve. "You need to go, Chloe," I said, my voice softer but no less firm. "Find a place to stay, get yourself together. When you have a plan, a real, stable plan, we can talk, but you are not taking them anywhere." She lifted her head, her eyes red and swollen. "I have no money, Maria, I have nothing. Where am I supposed to go?" "I don't know," I said honestly. "That's something you need to figure out." I went inside, my hands shaking, and closed the door, leaving her on the steps. It was one of the cruelest things I'd ever done, and one of the most necessary. The next few days were excruciatingly tense. Chloe, to my surprise, actually listened. She left. She called our parents, who, after a long and tearful conversation, reluctantly wired her enough money for a cheap motel room for a week. She called me twice a day, every day, begging to speak to the kids. I allowed for short, supervised video calls. They were awkward and painful. Mia would just stare at the screen, while Leo would give one-word answers, his resentment a palpable wall between them. Chloe would end each call in tears, accusing me of poisoning them against her. I thought we were in a horrible, painful stalemate. I had no idea she was planning another, more desperate move. The final straw came on a Thursday morning, 5 days after her return. I was at work, trying to focus on cataloging a new collection of historical maps, when my phone buzzed with an alert from my bank. It was a fraud warning. We have detected unusual activity on your savings account. A transfer of $5,000 to an external account has been initiated. If this was not you, please contact us immediately. My blood ran cold. $5,000. That was a huge chunk of the emergency fund mark, and I had so carefully built. I immediately called the bank. The customer service representative was calm and efficient. "Yes, ma'am," she said. "The transfer was initiated online a few minutes ago. It was flagged because it's an unusually large sum being moved to a new, unverified recipient account." "It wasn't me," I said, my voice trembling. "Please cancel it immediately." "Of course. We've blocked the transaction and have placed a temporary freeze on your account for your security," she confirmed. "Can I ask, do you know a Chloe Garcia?" That was the name on the recipient account. I felt the air leave my lungs. For a second, I couldn't speak. She had done it. She had actually done it. Years ago, before she had spiraled into complete financial chaos, I had briefly added her to my savings account as an emergency beneficiary, a foolish act of sisterly trust that I thought would help her if she ever got into real trouble. I had removed her years ago, but she must have remembered my login details or had access to old information. It was a desperate, despicable Hail Mary. The betrayal was absolute. It was so much worse than the abandonment. The abandonment was selfish and reckless, but this was malicious. This was theft. She had looked me in the eye, cried on my porch, and all the while she was plotting to steal from me, to take the very money that was being used to feed, clothe, and house her own children. I hung up the phone, shaking with a white-hot rage I had never felt before. I called Mark and told him what happened. His response was a string of quiet, furious words. "Stay there," he said. "I'm handling this." An hour later, Chloe was on my doorstep again. This tea. Mark was with me, his arms crossed over his chest, his expression like granite. "What is going on?" Chloe demanded, her voice high and frantic. "My call with the kids was canceled. You won't answer my texts. What did I do now?" I held up my phone, showing her the screenshot of the fraud alert. I said nothing. She stared at it, and her face went from indignant to terrified. The color drained from her cheeks as she recognized what she was looking at. She opened her mouth, but no sound came out. "You tried to steal from us, Chloe," Mark said, his voice dangerously calm. "You tried to empty Maria's savings account. Did you really think we wouldn't find out?" I was desperate," she stammered, her eyes darting between us. "You wouldn't help me. I needed that money to get a place, to get my kids back." "To get your kids back?" I finally exploded, the last of my composure gone. "You were stealing the money that buys their food, the money that pays for their doctor's appointments, the money that keeps a roof over their heads, a roof you abandon them under. This was never about them. This was only ever about you." I stepped forward, my fury a living thing. "You don't get to be their mother right now, Chloe. You have lost that privilege. You are unstable, you are untrustworthy, and you are a danger to their well-being. The phone calls are over. The visits are over. Everything is over until you get serious, professional help." Tears were streaming down her face now, the panicked tears of someone who was truly trapped. "You can't do that," she sobbed. "I'll take you to court. I'll tell them you're keeping them from me." "Go ahead," Mark said, his voice like ice. "Try it. We have a 6-month record of your abandonment. We have a court order granting us guardianship. And now, we have a bank record and a fraud report showing you attempted to commit a felony against the very people caring for your children. How do you think that will look to a judge, Chloe?" The fight visibly drained out of her, replaced by the horrifying recognition of her own self-destruction. She had cornered herself, burned every bridge, and salted the earth behind her. She had nothing left. She stared at me, her eyes pleading, but there was nothing I could give her anymore. The well of my sympathy had finally, irrevocably run dry. This was the final straw. There was no coming back from this. The aftermath of the bank confrontation was a deafening silence. Chloe crumbled. The fight, the entitlement, the rage, it all evaporated, leaving behind a hollowed-out woman on my porch. Defeated, she turned and walked away without another word. She didn't have the ammunition to fight us anymore. She had handed it all to us herself. That night, after the kids were in bed, Mark and I sat at the kitchen table with Ms. Evans, our lawyer, on speakerphone. We explained what had happened. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "This is, legally speaking, a gift," Ms. Evans said, her voice devoid of any emotion. "Her attempt to access your funds is a clear demonstration of her instability and lack of judgment. It solidifies our case for permanent guardianship, should we choose to pursue it. It also gives us immense leverage." Leverage, it was such a cold word, but that's what it was. We now held all the cards. A few days later, a formal letter drafted by Ms. Evans was sent to the motel where Chloe was staying. It laid out our terms in stark, non-negotiable language. There would be no contact with the children, no calls, no visits, nothing for a minimum of 90 days. During this time, she was required to secure full-time employment and provide proof of income. She was required to find stable, independent housing and provide a copy of a signed lease. And she was required to enroll in and consistently attend both individual therapy and a certified parenting course, with verifiable reports sent directly to our lawyer. The letter stated that only after all these conditions were met, and not a moment sooner, would we consider allowing a single, 1-hour supervised visit in a therapeutic setting. From there, any further contact would be at our sole discretion, guided by the recommendations of the children's therapist and our lawyer. We were making it clear. The path back to her children wasn't a right she could demand, but a privilege she would have to earn, step by painful step. We expected a furious phone call, another fight, more accusations. Instead, we got silence. A week later, our lawyer received a one-sentence email from a public library computer. "I agree to the terms," it said. Signed, Chloe. The following months were strange and quiet. We didn't hear from Chloe directly, but we received the periodic updates through Ms. Evans. A pay stub from a full-time job at a diner. A letter from a therapist confirming her weekly attendance. It was progress, but it felt distant, clinical, like reading reports about a stranger. Meanwhile, our life continued to move forward. We settled into our new rhythm as a family of 4. The shadow of Chloe's return had lifted, replaced by the security of the boundaries we had built. Leo and Mia, shielded from the adult drama, began to truly heal. The change in Leo was the most profound. With the threat of his mother's chaotic return removed, he finally allowed himself to relax, to be a kid. He joined the school soccer team, and Mark became the assistant coach. I would sit on the sidelines with Mia, cheering until our voices were hoarse. One evening, about 4 months after the confrontation, I was tucking Leo into bed. He was quiet for a moment, then he looked at me with his serious, dark eyes. "Is my mom ever going to live with us again?" he asked. The question was direct, free from the anger that had once coated all his words about her. I sat on the edge of his bed, choosing my words carefully. "I don't know, buddy," I said honestly. "Your mom is working really hard right now to get better so she can be a good mom. But right here, this house, with me and Uncle Mark and Mia, this is your home. You are safe here and you are loved. That will never, ever change." He seemed to consider that for a moment. Then he nodded, a small, accepting gesture. "Okay," he said. He rolled over and was asleep in minutes. It felt like a corner had been turned. He wasn't waiting by the door anymore. He was home. 6 months after she had agreed to our terms, we received a formal report. Chloe had a steady job. She was sharing a small but clean 2-bedroom apartment with a roommate. Her therapist noted significant progress in taking accountability for her actions. She had completed the parenting course. She had met the terms. Ms. Evans called us. "It's time," she said. "She's requesting the supervised visit." Mark and I talked about it for hours. We talked with the kids' therapist. Were we ready? Were they ready? The therapist advised that a short, structured meeting could be a positive step for their healing, as long as their expectations were managed. The visit took place at the therapist's office. It was a sterile, neutral space. Mark and I sat in the waiting room while the therapist brought Leo and Mia into a room to meet their mother for the first time in almost a year. The 60 minutes felt like a lifetime. When the door opened, the kids came out looking subdued but calm. Chloe exited a few minutes later, her eyes red, but she didn't look at us. She just nodded at the therapist and left. Later, the therapist told us the meeting had been okay. Chloe had apologized. She hadn't made promises she couldn't keep. She told them she loved them and that she was sorry she had hurt them. Leo had listened silently. Mia had shown her a drawing she'd made. It was a start. Our life now is not the one I ever planned, but it's a life I wouldn't trade. We are a family. A complicated, messy, patched-together family, but a family nonetheless. We have permanent legal guardianship of Leo and Mia. The supervised visits with Chloe continue once a month for an hour. They are still awkward, still freighted with the weight of the past, but they are happening. Maybe one day she will be a consistent, positive force in their lives. Maybe she won't. We've learned to live with the uncertainty. What I know for sure is that when I come home from the quiet order of the library, I am greeted by happy chaos. I am greeted by Mia showing me her latest gymnastics move and Leo wanting to tell me about the goal he scored at soccer practice. I am greeted by Mark, my steady, unwavering partner in all of this, with a smile that says, "We did it. We built this. We took a broken, abandoned foundation and built a home filled with love, laughter, and security." We are their guardians in every sense of the word. For anyone reading this who might be facing a similar impossible situation, I see you. The choices are never easy, and the right path is often the hardest one. But when it comes to protecting a child, your love has to be fiercer than your fear.